maybe I'll unmute. But yeah, I just see exit full screen up there. Yeah, I know. I usually either what? Mute, unmute, mute. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see it right now. So it's not that big a deal right now, I don't think, but at least there's share screen. Is that what? Oh, okay. Okay. And again, that's up there at the 3 dots or something. But okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I don't see the 3, and I normally do. Maybe it's because people aren't there yet signing up. So, okay. Yeah, I know it. That's true. Okay. Well, I'm not muted, so okay. And participants are up, and it just shows me, so not quite 11:30 yet. So, okay. Well. Mm-hmm.
Which can be normal in like adolescence, but one person who can put them down, the other person who has that brain that's predisposed to the to addiction cannot, and very quickly becomes addicted. And the exposure to drugs is not always recreational. The exposure to drugs, I would say at least half of the patients who come to see me, very unfortunately, their exposure to opioids initially was through a prescription, a very valid and legitimate prescription through a doctor for like a car accident or a back injury or something that happened. And because their brain is sort of primed for addiction, unfortunately, they became quickly addicted to these opioid medications. And the way we defined, does someone have a problem with drugs? It's not just the physical dependence on drugs. That's actually sort of the least important part. The more important part is the loss of control, that people are not able to stop even though they want very much to, and the consequences of the use, that bad things are happening to them personally and medically and socially because of their use, but they still are not able to control it. And for opioid use disorder in particular, there are 3 very effective medications that help to help people to get into recovery and stay into recovery, to reduce death and reduce drug use. And the 3 medications that are approved by the government to do this are the oldest one is methadone. When you think about a methadone clinic, very effective, a lot of stigma around it, but an incredibly effective treatment. Now that's not an option for people that live down here because that you have to be in Anchorage. You have to go every day into the clinic in person to get those medications. For the last about 15 years, a little bit longer, close to 20 years now, we've had a medication called buprenorphine, which is a safer medication less at risk for side effects or for abuse or misuse of the medication. That does act on the opioid receptors, but only partially, to allow someone to normalize their feelings and to reduce cravings. And it also blocks opioids. So if a person is taking buprenorphine and they use heroin or something, it's blocked and it doesn't have any effect. And then the medication naltrexone, which is just a blocker. It's not quite as helpful for reducing cravings, and a person has to go through a detox before they can get on that medication, which is a big barrier to getting on that medication. But depending on the person's, what their desires are, where they live, what their other medical problems are, we can almost always find that one of these three medications is the right fit for them and can be very helpful for their success in treatment. And the most important benefit of medications, and when you see this term MAT, you might see it in the news or in these slides. MAT means medications for addiction treatment or medication assisted treatment. So these medications, these MAT medications, are very effective in reducing mortality. So they can reduce mortality rates by 80%. Which is just amazing. We have very few medications in modern medicine that are so effective in reducing death rates. So every patient who has an opioid addiction should be on one of these medications. It's critical to reduce their risk of death. But what we know is these medications only work when people are taking them. So it's critical. We spend most of our time in treatment really is trying to keep people on their medications to make sure that they don't go off of them. If they go off their medication, it stops working and their risk of overdose death goes way up, and their risk of going back to using drugs goes way up. So it's very important. These medications, similar to medications for high blood pressure and diabetes, they're medications for a chronic disease. Addiction is a chronic disease, and they're meant to be taken for many years. And access to these medications can literally mean the difference between life or death. And this is particularly true for people who are very vulnerable populations, folks who are homeless, folks who are recently coming out of incarceration and re-entry into the community. The risk of death can be very high if people don't have access to the right medications. And what we do know is that when we treat addiction, any kind of addiction, it really doesn't matter what the substance is, that without medications to help folks, the risk of return to use or relapse, what we might call, is very, very high. And so regardless of the substance, if people just try to kind of do it on their own and just use their willpower and they don't get help from a doctor, most people, more than 80 to 90% of people will go back to using drugs before the end of the year is up. So, just plain abstinence-based therapy without taking any medications is not effective in treating opioid use disorder. And our goal when we're treating someone with a opioid agonist medication, which would be like buprenorphine or methadone, is we want to help them to feel normal and to take away those cravings. And so this graph, if you look at the light blue line, this is sort of how you feel during the day. A typical person who is addicted to heroin, they actually spend almost all of their day feeling sick. What you might hear is dope sick or in withdrawal. Heroin is a very short-acting drug. The effects of it wear off after 4 to 6 hours, and then they may have a very short period of time where they feel intoxicated from it, a very short period of time where they feel normal and functioning, where they can kind of do the things that they need to do that we all need to do, like going to work, taking care of our children, all those sorts of things. But then unfortunately, most of the day they end up feeling sick, feeling withdrawal, which is, like the worst flu that you've ever had, worse than the worst flu that you ever had. And they can't actually function like that. And they actually have to use again in order to not feel sick. And as people's tolerance develops to a drug, it actually becomes harder and harder for them to actually get intoxicated. And actually, most of the time that they're actually not using to feel intoxicated. They're just using to not feel sick because of the consequences of opioid withdrawal. And so they spend their whole day seeking, how am I going to get my next dose of drugs so that I don't feel sick? And they have no time left, and they're not functioning well, and they're too sick to really be able to do anything else in life, which is why they don't show up for work and they lose their job and they can't pay their bills because they're having to spend all their money on drugs, and which their lives fall apart. So if we can help with the medication to normalize their brain functioning and their body functioning so that they feel well, they don't feel sick and they don't feel intoxicated, then they don't need to think about drugs anymore. The cravings go away and they're well, they're physically well, they're mentally well, and then they can get back to real life. They're able to work and take care of their children and all the important things that everyone needs to be able to do. And this is kind of looking comparison of the effectiveness of these 3 different medications. Abstinence alone, I mean, just trying not to use or getting, being in a support group but not taking any medication, again, is really not effective for opioid addiction. Only about 5 to 10% of people will be successful in following that route. The success rate for staying in treatment on the naltrexone is about 30 to 40%. Staying on buprenorphine is about 50 to 60%, and for methadone is about 60 to 70%. So people have dramatically higher success when they take a medication. And when we look at comparing the effect of medication to the effect of counseling, we see, again, there's a dramatic difference. And so this is from a very large study that looked at patients who were, the green line is patients who were only getting counseling, counseling for substance use. And the red and blue lines is patients who were taking a medication like methadone or buprenorphine. And this is looking at relapse rates. So we see the folks who stay on medication have a dramatically lower risk of returning to drug use than the folks who are only doing counseling. 10 times less in the first year. But even if you look out 3 years, their risk of relapse if they stay on medication is a third the risk of people that go off their medication. And even 5 years out, they still have half of their risk. So the benefit extends many, many years on this medication, and we actually don't know of any time which the benefit ends. And so, but we do know if people stop taking their medication, they have a high risk of returning to use. So again, we want to encourage people to stay on medication for a long time to be able to get the maximum benefit out of their therapy. And one of the major stigmas around these medications for treatment is that they're just replacing one drug for another or just replacing one addiction for another. But that's really sort of a misunderstanding about how these medications work in treatment. So again, when we look at addiction, addiction is compulsive drug use despite harmful consequences. But with these medications, when you take a daily medication that improves your functioning, improves your health, improves your quality of life while reducing drug use and reducing death, this does not meet the definition for addiction. So people taking these medications depend on their daily medication to keep their disease in remission, the same way a person with diabetes or high blood pressure needs to take their chronic medication to stay healthy. And we do know that addiction treatment is very cost effective. And so approximately for about every dollar you invest in addiction treatment, you are getting basically between $5 and $12 back, depending on how many different factors you factor in for reducing crime, reducing healthcare costs, reducing loss of productivity, all these things. It's a huge return on investment to make sure that we offer people addiction treatment. And this is why now, in the past, there were some issues with insurance not covering costs of addiction treatment, but now all insurances now cover the cost of these medications to treat addiction, the cost of the doctor's visits and the counseling as well, because they know it's a very, very important healthcare service to pay for. And again, this is looking at the cost. Even though medications can be expensive and doctor visits are expensive, it's still cheaper to have someone on medications than not. And this is the same population where the green line is patients who are only getting counseling services, and the red and blue lines are patients who are taking medications. And this is the cost of their healthcare. And so the healthcare, although the medications and doctor visits are expensive, their healthcare costs are still lower because they are not getting sick as often, they're not suffering from overdoses, they're not having emergency room visits for drug withdrawal or for drug-related infections or drug-related, car accidents and all these things that can increase healthcare costs. So it actually is cheaper to the healthcare system to make sure that people stay on their medication. It also is very effective in reducing crime. We have data for actually going back decades looking at methadone programs that when patients are in a treatment program and they stay in their treatment program, there's about a 70 to 80% reduction in engaging in crime. So it's very effective at reducing, especially when we think of things like victimless, or, not victimless, nonviolent crimes like property thefts, things that we think of, people, are trying to get money to buy their drugs, but otherwise wouldn't be engaging in the crime. So when they get in treatment and they're not needing to buy drugs anymore, that they are much less risky to engage in crime and much less risk of going back to jail. So luckily, we've been getting more and more people recently from the criminal justice system being referred to us for treatment to try to, get well and stay well and reduce the chance that they're going to have recidivism and engage in crime in the future. And more and more often now, we're trying to make sure that no matter that people can get treatment whenever and wherever they need it. It used to be that you had to go to a specialist and you had to wait for weeks or months to get into a program. But now we get referrals from all over. We get referrals from the jail. We get folks who come in to see us. I volunteer and help to run the local syringe exchange program. And all the times we get patients from there who, are like, okay, I'm ready to get treatment, and can you help me to get into treatment? In the emergency department now, in most hospitals, including in Homer, they actually are able now to start people on medications for treatment while they're in the emergency room. So we really try to make sure that no matter where a person is, that they're asking for help, that they can get help quickly right then when they're motivated to get help. And success in recovery, it's not just about stopping drugs, it's about improving their lives in general, staying out of jail, being able to care for their children, being able to regain the trust of their family and friends and have stable housing and hold a job. These are all the wonderful benefits that we see if people are able to get effective treatment. It's not just about the drug use itself. At our program at NCC, the sorts of services that we offer patients, we prescribe the medications, but we also do one-on-one counseling with them at the clinic. We try to refer them to our we have counseling available if they're willing to accept that. And sometimes it takes a while for folks to be willing to accept counseling. But luckily the medications can still be very effective even if patients don't have access to counseling or don't want to do counseling. We have a peer recovery services, which is folks who in the past used to use drugs and now they're in long-term recovery, and they help their peers who'd say, I've been there, I used to be where you're at, I can help you, to just be a support person for them. We do a lot of case management to help people get signed up for insurance, to help them get transportation to their appointments, help them apply if they need more help than what we can offer. We help them to get into like a residential treatment center or more intensive therapy. We offer consultation services to the hospital for when patients are in there with drug-related illnesses, to make sure they get the care they need and get connected to us. And we also offer harm reduction services. So sometimes we have patients who they may stop using one drug. Let's say they may stop using heroin, but they may have another drug they're still using, like methamphetamine. And so we continue to work with them, even though when they're still using drugs, to keep them as safe as possible, to make sure that they have safe, clean injection equipment, that they have overdose kits, treat them for Hep C so they're not spreading Hep C around the community, and really make sure that we keep people as safe and healthy as possible and reduce the harms of drugs, both to the individual and to community as a whole. And related to harm reduction or trying to help folks, that we try to meet patients where they're at, and every patient has a different goal when they come in to see us. But whether someone is dealing with active addiction, whether they've left us and they're coming back again, or left us and coming back again, that we're always open, to take them back and see them again. And we try to always treat people with respect, no matter how sick they are. We work with the patients to set their goals, because everyone has different goals in their life for what they're trying to reach. And acknowledge that patients have the right to determine what their care is, how much they're going to participate, how intensive level of care that they need. And we continue to see patients even when they're struggling, even when they're still using drugs, they're having relapses. If they're willing to come and see us, then we're willing to help them as much as they can, as much as they're able to accept our help. So that's all I have to share with you today, and I would be happy to take questions from folks if you have some.
If you could unshare, Doctor.
Yeah.
Thanks. I have a comment and a question. I want to thank you, Dr. Sarah, for services you're providing. And I think the saying used to be, if you shake any family tree, you'll have an alcoholic fall out, but now it's more like you'll have an addict fall out. And I think, you know, the services you're providing are probably, well, the development of them, support of them, probably long overdue. But what do you see basically as far as relapse? Is there key components, even if the drug is available for them to stave off the need? Is there anything you can share? Because the stigma around any addiction, of course, even people that smoke and try to quit are sometimes feeling bad about it. And, you know, so any enlightenment as a community member, and to try to not fall into that trap of shaming and criticizing when that's sometimes easier.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you brought up that, you know, I think one of the important things to remember is that relapse is a part of any chronic disease. That folks who have addiction, just like folks who have other health conditions, go through periods of time when their disease is well controlled, and then they go through periods of time where they're not doing well and they've fallen back into things again. And so I think with when we speak with both patients and their family members and their loved ones around them, it's always important to remember that that you know, if bad things happen and you go back to using, that doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're not going to succeed in treatment. It just means that you need to, you know, intensify your care and come back in. And so there's a lot of shame around relapse, and then people are so ashamed they just drop out of care and they don't want to go back, or the family member says, oh, well, they were taking that medication, but they relapsed, so it didn't work, so it's a failure. But you know, just like with quitting smoking, you know, most people have to try quitting smoking 7 to 10 times in their lifetime before they'll quit for good. And then they still may, you know, pick up smoking again 5 years later. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful in getting back into long-term recovery. And I think it's just so important to understand that the addiction is a chronic disease that affects the brain, and it is very treatable. And the most important thing for people to be successful is to get back into treatment and to stay engaged in treatment. So for family members to just really, if you have a loved one who's dealing with addiction, to just really do everything you can to encourage that person to seek medical help, and we can connect them, you know, with behavioral health as well, because there's always how severe the disease is. There's always hope that people are going to get better. Sometimes it happens very quickly when people get into treatment. Sometimes people need, you know, years of start and stop and false starts of treatment before they finally sticks and they're in long-term recovery. But again, I say that there's always hope, and that you know, treatment can be very effective, and it's quite normal for people to have to try a few times before they reach their long-term success.
This is Glenn. I have a question. So in your presentation, you showed how the most effective drug is methadone. And I thought you said it's only available in Anchorage. You have to go to Anchorage. And so if someone wants to or able to do that, do they have places for people to stay for them to go to Anchorage?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the regulations around the use of methadone to treat opioid use disorder, they are managed on a federal level, and they are very, very strict. And so, you know, methadone is also used as a pain medication. And so you'll sometimes see people take it for chronic pain, but it can't be prescribed for someone with opioid use disorder outside of what's called an opioid treatment program, or what in common language we would say is a methadone clinic. And so the way methadone clinics operate is that the person has to go in physically every single day to get their medication. When they've been stable for a long time, for many, many months, they do get some privileges to take home like a week's worth of medication at a time. So essentially, it is not possible to get methadone to treat your opioid use disorder unless you live near a methadone clinic. And again, because these medications are meant to be taken for years, it's, you know, it's not something you can just go and get 2 weeks of housing or a month of housing in Anchorage. You have to move permanently to Anchorage or Fairbanks or Juneau. the few couple places where the services are offered. Otherwise, it's just not accessible to people who are in the rest of the state. So that, unfortunately, because we're a very large state and rural and very spread out, most of our area, our geographical area, folks do not have access to that medication for treatment. But it is the most effective medication, and it would be nice if there was more access points for places so that people could choose that as a treatment. We've had a number of patients who would prefer to choose that as a treatment, but it's just not available to them because their housing is down here, their family's down here, and they aren't willing or able to move to Anchorage. So unfortunately, it's not accessible to everyone.
And one quick follow-up question is you mentioned how COVID has really created another really spark and increase of cases. Is in the various funding and programs, are they being, more funding or something to help them deal with this escalation?
There has been some new funding, yes. Fortunately, I think, our clinic, along with some others, were able to secure some COVID funding, some for general medical care, but some specific to treat substance use and mental health issues. So I think that is one good thing that we've seen. We've been able to offer, more telemedicine services that have been sort of restricted in the past around drug treatment. Those have opened up, so that's allowed us to stay connected to our patients during this very stressful time when we definitely have seen an increase in relapse in folks who maybe have been stable for a long time, and the stress of social isolation, being cut off from, maybe like, an AA group or an NA group or things where they used to get their support, maybe having financial stressors and other things going on, has, triggered, more relapses and unfortunately nationwide, more overdose deaths. So, but I think that that a lot of progress has been made during this time to try to increase accessibility to treatment, but it hasn't happened everywhere. There are definitely geographical areas. I think we've actually done a pretty good job in Alaska in increasing access to treatment, but there are still many geographical areas where many people don't have any local access to treatment, or they may have, their clinic may have closed down during COVID, or their counseling or their support group closed down during COVID. So so not all folks had equal access during this time, which is unfortunate.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation.
Another question, Dr. Sarah, do you think that, well, first, is most of this federally funded and then distributed throughout the state? Or is the state kicking in some of this as far as the clinics? Maybe that first.
And do you mean like related to COVID or just general treatment?
To the addiction.
Yeah, so most of the grants to treat addiction, most of them do come from the federal level, but some of them are directly federal grants that you apply to. They're nationwide applications, and others are specifically, they will give the money to the state. So there's every state got money to treat the state opioid response grants that every state has gotten for the last 5 years. And so they do allow the states to have some leeway with deciding where do they need to best spend their money. In Alaska, we've done that. Probably the biggest project we've done is the Project Hope, which is distributing Narcan overdose kits and educating people to reduce overdose rates. And Alaska was actually one of only 4 states that during this last 12-month period appears to have had a decline in overdose death rates rather than an increase. So I think, using the grant funds for those sorts of, overdose prevention has been very effective here. So it's sort of a mixture that almost all the money comes from the federal government, but it is sometimes funneled through the state for them to kind of dictate where it should best be used.
One other question, and I'll be quiet. With the changes in our laws with opioid task force and different things. I mean, my experience with clients coming in that have been addicted or because of pain, a lot of their addictions came through pain clinics where simply there was people just dishing out drugs and increasing numbers, increasing strength to manage pain. But since those changes, have you seen any decline in numbers or anything significant Because my sense is that a lot of these clinics are gone now because they've had to.
Yeah, so I think that overall with the new state monitoring of prescribing and kind of more oversight and new new recommendations on how we should be managing these medications, I think there has definitely there has been nationwide and in Alaska a dramatic reduction in opioid prescribing in the numbers of prescription written. So we are seeing there's been a trend over the last 5 years of, fewer patients that are coming in to see me are actively using prescription opioids, and a larger percentage of them, unfortunately, are using heroin. It's a mixture of different things. Part of that is that some of the folks who were taking prescription opioids, but were sort of flying under the radar. They were actually addicted at that time, and either because their prescriber didn't know, or they had an irresponsible prescriber. When they lost their prescription, they weren't able to just stop. They switched to heroin. But unfortunately, it's kind of the perfect storm that also right at the same time, about 5 to 10 years ago, heroin became much more widely available and incredibly cheap. Along with fentanyl being mixed with heroin. And so fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that's much more powerful, 50 times more powerful than heroin, that the drug cartels are buying very, very cheaply. It's made synthetically in China and cutting heroin with it. So at that same time, heroin became much more potent and much more deadly. And then all these things happened at the same time. So I think over time, we're hoping to see that, it curbs off as, and more access to treatment especially comes available. But I think the main thing we saw so far is sort of a switch from less folks becoming addicted to prescription opioids, which is great. But unfortunately, more people are dealing with heroin addiction right now.
Thank you.
Doctor, with the change in laws for marijuana use, for personal marijuana use, has there been any change at all in how things are going with the opioids and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there was some initial thought, there was a lot of news stories that came out about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer ago than that, with kind of looking at the association between states that had legalized medical marijuana, also seeming to be the same states that seem to have reduction in their opioid addiction and overdose rates. But in retrospect and looking back, now that we have had more time, more states that have legalized and more time to look at that numbers, they're finding out that there does not appear to be an association between those two things, as far as, the availability of marijuana and overdose rates. What we do know is that folks who, like for opioid addiction treatment in particular, if you look at folks who use marijuana versus folks who don't use marijuana, they both appear to be equally successful in treatment for their opioid addiction. So it doesn't appear to have a negative effect, but it's unclear. The initial thought that switch from, maybe they were taking opioids for pain and now they're going to use marijuana for pain. And so that's going to help overdose risks go down. It hasn't really played out the way that some folks thought it was. It doesn't seem to have much effect in either direction at this point in time.
Thank you very much.
Who does the medication assisted treatment besides you in the area? There didn't used to be very many, and now there are quite a few. Homer Medical has been developing a program for the last year, which they officially started opening and accepting new patients about 2 months ago. And I helped them along with the Opioid Response Network to help develop their program. There are some individual providers, I think at Catchback Medical, I'm not sure that they're taking new patients, but in the past have offered some of that treatment. So those are the main folks now for buprenorphine. For naltrexone, also SVT clinic has naltrexone available. And a number of providers in the Soldotna and Kenai area. So now there is the capacity is really there as far as prescribing doctors to be able to treat
I think to treat all the patients, it's just getting them into care, you know, getting them over that hump and getting them into care. But the healthcare capacity, I think, is really there now in this community, which is a big improvement from where it was, you know, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Sarah, I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Maynard.
Dr. Spencer, do these treatments stand alone or can they be used in the cocktail?
In combination, like with what else? With
Well, you mentioned 3 different.
Oh, sure, yes. So yeah, these medications, each one can only be used by itself. They can't be combined. Actually, naltrexone would, if you gave it to someone that was taking buprenorphine or naloxone, they get really, really sick. So yeah, you have to just pick one. You can't do more than one. But sometimes we do treatments, like it's not uncommon that we have, let's say, someone that is addicted to opioids, but they also have an alcohol problem. And so there are also medications that help people to stop drinking, help to reduce cravings for alcohol. So we do sometimes combine those medications for alcohol use with these medications for opioid use. But with the medications for opioid use, you just pick one of the 3 to take.
Thank you.
I'm gonna bring it. My own ones are have a heavier pair, but they're bulky. I only got a pocket big enough to carry.
I carried mine in my pocket for a while yesterday. I actually dressed perfectly.
Susie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Sarah, is she still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there. So someone finally decides they need help and they contact you. How does that look like? What does that look like?
Mhm.
They contact you, they say, I need to get in touch with you.
Yeah, so it usually happens. Sometimes people call the clinic directly, and so we'll call them back and get them set up. Most often, my case manager that I work with, her name is Annette Hubbard, and she has a kind of cell phone number that's sort of out there for everyone in the community to kind of use at any time. And she does most of our intake work. So oftentimes patients or parents or family members or a probation officer or another healthcare worker will contact her, either contact the clinic or contact her directly and say, hey, I need to get help, or my loved one needs to get help, and we'll get them set up for an appointment. We're usually able to get people in very quickly, usually in less than a week. And we really strive hard for that, because we know that when people are ready for addiction treatment, it is critical to get them treatment as soon as possible, right then when they're motivated, because 2 weeks down the road, that motivation may have passed, and they may be in a darker place then. So we try to get people treatment right away. We also get referrals from the emergency room. So now the emergency room has had a program for the last 2 years where if someone comes in and says, hey, I need help, I want to get on medications I don't want to use anymore, they will actually start the medication with the patient in the emergency room, and they will contact us, and then we'll get the patient in very quickly, generally within 3 days or less, to start medical treatment with us.
Okay, thanks.
One more question. Do people who are incarcerated, they have access to treatment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the state of Alaska, it didn't used to be that they did. Now they can continue their medication at least for the first month in some facilities, not in all of them. And they are trying to start a program in the Alaska system to start people on medications before they leave prison. That's very important, because overdose rates, the first 2 weeks that you leave prison, overdose rates are 120 times higher. So it's so important to get people on medication before they leave the prison. And there's been amazing results in states like Rhode Island, where they've seen dramatic improvement, where they did start all patients on medication while they were incarcerated, and had huge reductions in death rates, and also in folks coming back into jail because they were on treatment. So unfortunately, with the government bureaucracy and that sort of things, change happens more slowly on that level. And but we are starting to see some changes happen in Alaska, where they have some kind of what you might call pilot programs to start offering this to folks folks before they leave, which is really the key, is trying to get people on medication before they leave, because if you don't, there's a very, very risky to them of leaving without being on any treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Spencer.
Mhm.
I have a question. Dr. Spencer, I'm curious to know, so much of the problem, as you have suggested, with treating addiction is the stigma. And I'm wondering, and I think often people attach a certain profile to someone who is dealing with addiction. And I'm wondering, based on your experience, would we be surprised in terms of, the type of people or the profile of people who are having addiction problems? Would we be surprised and might have a different concept? And then also, do you feel that because it's becoming more widely recognized how pervasive this is the stigma changing at all? Because that seems to be quite important to actually to people getting treatment and support.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that addiction is the number one most stigmatized health disease in the world. It's more stigmatized than even like severe mental illness is, as far as people getting housing, jobs, and all that sorts of thing. And a lot of that issues around the stigma, addiction related stigma, has to do with the way that it affects your brain and the behaviors that people exhibit when they're in active addiction. But we see folks from all ranges of life and all socioeconomic statuses. We, many patients who are, our patients, we love our patients. They're most of them are great people, and a lot of them have full-time jobs. A lot of them are parents, who are otherwise, still sometimes come to us when they're still, functioning. But we realize that they're starting to lose control, and we have patients who come in and they may be, really struggling when they come in, but then they really completely turn their life around. They get a job, they get their kids back, they don't have any more legal problems. And they go to school. It's amazing to see the progress once people's addiction is treated, how much success they can have in life. And unfortunately, there's something, what you might want to say is like not selection bias, but a bias. You get biased depending on what you see, depending on what your life experiences are. So for someone, let's say, who's in the criminal justice system, like their bias might be like, oh God, treatment doesn't work because this person keeps coming back over and over and over again. They're never going to get better. They're always going to be a criminal, versus from my perspective, I get the very lucky perspective of seeing people get well, to see like how many people get well and stay well for years and years and years. And unfortunately, because of the stigma around addiction, many people who are successful in recovery are still too ashamed to share their success stories. And so I think it's really important for folks, if you know someone who has dealt with addiction in the past and has been successful, it's so important for people in recovery to share their stories of success, because they're still ashamed and they're still scared to share their stories. And so there are so many success stories that we don't hear. And so I think it's critically important to reduce stigma, to share those success stories, that recovery happens every day, and it's very possible, and people get better and can be, have fully functional lives again. So.
Okay, I think we'll stop the questions there. Dorotha is on, and Dr. Spencer, thank you so much. I think you can tell that we are fascinated with what you're doing, and it's just incredible for the community. Okay, Dorotha,
I'm going to sign off. Thank you for inviting me to share.
All right, thank you for coming.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.
Thank
And hi, I'm Dr. Spencer. She's like
Hi.
one of the biggest blessings in this town. We are so happy that she joined the community and offers such a great service. Okay, a quick update. The clinic, the vaccine clinic for this Friday and Saturday, it still has, I want to say, some appointments available. So when we saw that we probably weren't going to, quote, sell out of appointments, we started kind of making an internal plan, and we're planning on allocating 2 vials of those to home health. And that would allow the home health nurses to reach out to current and former patients that are homebound to be able to do 20 of those through home health. So the rest are still available. As of the most recent look, we had about 19 appointments available. So I think it's very possible that they will all be gone by the time Saturday closes. So we'll see. Testing still continues at the hospital. We do not have any hospitalized patients with COVID. We don't know when we'll move into the next tier of eligible for vaccine. We do not know. We're still in the 65 years and older and the frontline healthcare workers. Just trying to think what you're interested in or what you want or care to know about.
Dorothy, this is Reed.
Yeah.
Are there still vaccinations going on the 13th and 14th as well as this weekend? Is that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this weekend is all brand new people. The 13th and 14th is 700 people's second doses. So the 13th and 14th is just the redo of January 15th and 16th.
Gotcha.
What this coming weekend is another 600 brand new people, almost 600 brand new people.
So DeRosa, did you need volunteers from Rotary to help with this clinic?
I am so sorry to say that I am just not in the world of volunteer recruitment or assigning.
Okay.
So if Chief Kirko, Mark Kirko, the fire chief, is the person that's kind of leading that charge, and I do not know. So
Okay.
if I know he had a relationship with Lori and from the last time. So if she has not forwarded that on, that's all I know.
Okay.
DeRosa, Bernie, do you mean the 12th and 13th, not 13th, 15th?
Yeah.
February. The 12th is Friday, the 13th
Yeah,
is Saturday.
whatever the Friday, Saturday is, Friday,
No,
Saturday.
12, 13, yeah.
And everybody should already have their appointment for that. It should all be written down in your paperwork. If you were there earlier, you have a paperwork that shows you.
It's cooking something.
So, do you happen to know where we can go for factual information on after the vaccines, procedures that folks need to engage in and not engage in, and et cetera, et cetera? I've heard at least 6 different stories in the last 24 hours. So.
And expect 60 more over the next 3 months. So there is no data. So medical recommendations come from pools of people doing things over and over again that develops data to then make a recommendation on. There's no data. These vaccines are just being given out. The earliest one went out was July, and that was in a very tiny pool of people. So I can send you links. I can send Craig links of what's out there right now, but they'll change. The information will change as more and more people have it. And I'm assuming you're talking about things like, okay, now I'm fully vaccinated. Do I still need to wear a mask? Do I still need to, like, all that kind of stuff? Charlie? You're muted.
You're muted, Charlie.
Since this is an RNA-based vaccine and genetically modified thing, after we get our shots, do they stamp our forehead with GMO so everybody know we're a genetically modified organism?
Can we still go to Chipotle?
Probably not. Probably can't. Yeah.
I feel confident that based on the junk food I've been eating all my life, eventually that has genetically modified me in some way too.
It's a tattoo, Charlie.
DeRosa, just to build on what Vivian said, we have been sitting here for over a year now, listening to quote, scientific data based on scientific studies. And all this crap that's coming out now is all observational, which of course the scientists will tell you is not valid. Yet they're all jumping on board. This is what you have to do. I mean, if you want, you wonder why people don't have confidence in what's coming out of the medical community. There's a perfect example right there.
I have no great answer to that or comment to that. I just, did you see the news that in the nursing home in Fairbanks, they have like 7 or 8 people, both staff and residents, testing positive right now, even though they've gotten 2 rounds of the vaccination. So that nobody's sick. None of them are sick. Nobody has symptoms, but they're testing positive. So that would tell you either you can still.
They never said it was going to keep us from getting it. It's just going to make the symptoms less severe.
Right.
Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, wear 2 masks, wear 3 masks. Social distance, don't social distance. Nobody knows what the hell they're talking about.
Well, the thing that I can say is that in this facility, we have consistently seen that 2 masked people do not allow for transmission. That when you have a known positive with a known not positive, and they're both masked, so far, nobody has shared it. That's what I can tell you for certain. So that's all I know.
Hey, DeRosa, Will.
That is what I recall hearing, was that the reason that those of us that have had the vaccine need to continue wearing the mask, it is possible for us to get it yet and to pass it on. And so that's why we do have to wear a mask. At least that's what I had understood. I know there's all sorts of stories going on out there, but that seemed to me like make the most sense. So that's interesting about Fairbanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, DeRosa, Will, what have you found for side effects? What have you been hearing on the Moderna, particularly since that's what you're giving? What kind of side effects either after the first or the second shot?
The only side effects that we've seen locally beyond, I don't want to say normal, but some people say fatigue, some people say headache, but very short-lived. The only thing that I guess I'd say kind of caught us off guard, because it's not in the list by a real defined sentence. It just says injection site soreness, I think is all that it says on the list. And so when a few folks locally showed up with a big round kind of raised area, that just was like a little bit like, okay, well, it said injection site soreness. It was definitely injection site soreness for those few people. So that's probably and it's not unusual, because if you look online, if you Google it and look at the national poll, that is actually a common symptom. But for some reason in the fact sheet, it doesn't say a raised red area. It just says injection site. It might even say irritation or soreness. So I'd say that was the only unusual, if you will. Everything else seems to fit the profile of headache, fatigue, and even that's not by very many. So when you take your vaccine, we as the people who gave it to you, South Peninsula Hospital, we don't follow you. So we are just the vaccinators, and you have to take on the responsibility to reach out to the side effect tracker people and let them know, the CDC, and let them know. So we're trusting, and everybody leaves with that piece of paper. So we're trusting that people are doing that, because that's the only way you gather that collective tool of what the side effects are expected to be. So I hope people are doing that, because we are not. I just got off a big call with the state that was about that the state is looking at starting to track, they're seeing the need to possibly start tracking our own instead of letting people maybe or maybe not report back to the CDC what their side effects were.
Okay, guys, it's after 1 o'clock. So I'll call it Rotary for today, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dorotha.
Thanks, Dorotha. Thanks, Susan.
You
Bye-bye.
still there, Dorotha?
Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Dorotha.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, a kitty. Look at the kitty.
This is a mean, vicious beast.
Ooh.
You can tell.
Hey, Dorotha,
Oh.
do you know offhand,
Rosa?
what kind of quantity Safeways and or SVT is getting for shots? I know you guys are getting 600 plus.
Yeah, that's a good question, Will. So they got, SVT got 50, Kachemak Bay Medical got 50, 50, whatever 50 is 50. And so SVT 50, Kachemak Bay Medical 50. Just a quick little FYI, you can only order in batches of 100. So they split an order. So SVT 50, Kachemak Bay Medical 50. Safeway got 200. We ended up getting 600. I don't know what Ninilchik got. Ninilchik has been steadily getting some because they have 2 channels. They've got the native pipeline and the regular pipeline. So they're getting decent amount in Ninilchik. I think that's everybody for now. And Almer's, I'm pretty sure both pharmacies signed up to B, but it's not until March. And my husband went and did Safeway yesterday, and that was a good experience. They have a nice little room that you can go in and get your vaccine out of the public, and it was very good. The experience was very good. But like when I went on their website this morning, they don't have any openings. They're all full. Yeah, so like I said, we have just under 20 doses or appointments left right now. So hopefully anybody who wants one will get one this weekend.
Are you getting much resistance to the vaccine? People not wanting to get it, or
it's kind of hard because so just between the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us on the call, 7 of us, one of the populations that it tends to be resistant to taking the vaccine, the best way to reach them is radio. And the Peninsula Radio Group has been very resistant to putting out messages. And so that's been a bummer for us.
you know, Dennis has got a radio station. It's just online. Give him a jingle. Dennis Weidler.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So beyond that, there hasn't been there hasn't really been actually, to be honest with you, only one person like from a resistant conversation. I've only had one person, and all they said was they just said that I should put more warnings on the ads, in the ads and on the Facebook post and stuff, because I make it seem like come do this, and that I should be doing a more, I don't want to say warning, but just alerting people of the fact that we don't know a ton about it. But that is shared with people at the time of vaccination. But I guess I guess I could do that a little more in advance. It's just so information overload for people. I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, do you guys feel that you know that these are emergency use authorized vaccines? They don't have a 10-year record of proven safety or anything like that. I mean, they're hot off the presses. I don't know how you'd not know that. I don't know how you'd not know that they're hot off the presses. But
Have to be pretty ignorant.
I think there are a few of those out there.
Well, there's people that don't
yeah,
mention to the media, they're not ignorant.
yeah.
Well, and then you have the people that absolutely deny that any of this is going on.
Well, and they wouldn't be taking it. So, I mean, but for the people that are taking it, I hope they understand that they're taking something that hasn't had much of a track record for safety. Not because it's unsafe, but because it just got invented. Like it just got created in the last 6 months. Like, how can you have a true history of it? So
Better than nothing.
that's how I feel.
Yeah,
I feel it's better than nothing, and that there's hundreds of thousands that went before us, right?
yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah.
For me, I'm doing my best to stay safe and quit spreading it. And if it doesn't work, well, bummer. If it does work, fantastic.
Yeah.
At least you tried.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't try, you never get anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yep, at least you tried. That's right.
Well, the other day I heard Jen Psaki, I think that's the new press gal in Washington. I said, hey, we got a better one of them up here in Homer. So
Yeah, yeah.
keep up the great work.
Yeah, I sit here and say, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but you say that instead of trying to fake it.
Yeah, you say it with conviction.
I really don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen to you in 2 years after you take this. Oh, well.
Thank you very much, Dorotha.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Tell Brittany she's wonderful too.
Oh,
Yeah,
What?
she's yeah, anyway, she's very effective and efficient, nice phone voice and all that stuff.
you know, I was so close to hiring her into Vanita's position, and then she changed her mind, and I was like, oh, darn it.
So still open then?
Still open. Yep, still open.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's a great position. Really, they do a lot of good work in that department. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
thank you much.
Thank you. Okay, well,
I just tried to send you Dennis's phone number, but it doesn't not something about it, the message isn't liked.
I have Dennis in my phone. I can text him and ask him.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, it's just saying it's not delivered, so.
I'll send it to you.
Okay, good. All righty, well, great. Well, we're heading down this afternoon to set up for tomorrow. So round 2, here we go.
We'll have lots and lots of fun and high success.
Yeah. Thank you. And we did, I'm so sorry I keep forgetting things. I did learn from the state today that they're going to start breaking down the vaccine numbers by the same areas that they did testing. So it won't be long until we know how many on the Southern Peninsula have received vaccines.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'll be much more useful. Yep. Okay, see you all later. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thanks again.
Thanks a bunch, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Okay. I'll see you later. Thanks, Kurt, for the help.
Hey, Craig.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just got a call from Kip Absher. So
Oh,
he